Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Mosaic and Rewiring America's webinar on the Inflation Reduction Act. And today we're going to talk about some of the different provisions in the bill, the new law that affect homeowners and opportunities to save people money. Thank you for joining us. We're excited to have this discussion. We're going to record this session and make it available after the event for viewing. We'll also be sharing some FAQs and additional information as well. So be on the lookout for that. Let's maybe jump to that next slide. I'll introduce the panelists shortly, but just please note the information today is presented for informational education purposes only. The information related to the Inflation Reduction Act and its applicability is based on the presenter's understanding of how the Inflation Reduction Act will be implemented as of today. Homeowners' ability to obtain any particular tax credit described in this is limited by their ability to meet eligibility requirements. And in some cases, those are going to be state level versus federal. And none of this information today constitutes legal, tax, or financial advice. Recording pictures of the webinar are strictly prohibited, though we're happy to share materials after and continue the discussion and answer questions. So speaking today, we have Ari Matusiak, CEO of Rewiring America and co-founder and managing partner of Purpose Venture Group, and Patrick Moore, President and Chief Operating Officer at Mosaic. Both fantastic speakers. They're going to walk you through about 20 minutes of content, followed by Q&A. And please use the chat or the Q&A function to ask your questions, and we'll continue to answer those as we kind of work through the presentation and hopefully from today and here on after. And so Ari, you want to get started here? We can't hear you.
Sam, thank you so much. You would expect that I know how to do this by now. It's so wonderful to have an opportunity to be here with the awesome Mosaic team and to have a chance to talk with all of you on the webinar. And Patrick, always fun to do this together. So just to jump in, I think walk you through a little bit of what we want to cover, which Sam already sort of mentioned, which is to walk through a bit about this Inflation Reduction Act. And I think the way that I would set it up is first and foremost to underscore its magnitude. For those of you who have not been following as closely, the Inflation Reduction Act is simply stated the largest investment in climate in the history of the United States. So that's meaningful in and of itself. But what's really important to understand about that investment is that the whole, really the center of the U.S. climate policy and strategy is to decarbonize and electrify U.S. households. And so at the center of this Inflation Reduction Act, it's sort of its beating heart in a way, are incentives of various types that we'll walk through that help households over the course of the next decade go from a fossil fuel baseline to an efficient electric baseline. That's really the intention of this whole thing. And the theory behind it is that, yes, that is a must-do from a climate perspective, but as households electrify, they save money. And by Rewiring America's analysis, that if the average American household, if it electrified everything, would save an average of $1,800 a year. And that's a huge amount of money in a country where half of American families don't even have $400 in emergency savings. So if we can connect people structurally to a future state where they have machines in their home that give them comfort and peace of mind, but also help them save money year over year, that's a very good thing. And so what the Inflation Reduction Act really is a tool that has created an electric bank account for every single American household. And that's, I think, sort of the most efficient way to think about it. It's an electric bank account that every American household has for the next decade. The catch, though, is that almost all American households are unfamiliar with the fact that they have that electric bank account. And you all are key and essential, not only to connecting them to the ultimate machines that they are going to enjoy and the peace of mind that's going to come from the work that you do, but actually connecting them to the dollars in their bank accounts. So let's go through this a bit. Okay. So the way to think about the Inflation Reduction Act is that it's a series in this electric bank account that every American household has. are a number of different programs, and they have different sort of uses and types, but they break into three basic categories. Rebates that are point of sale, tax credits for those who have tax appetite, and low cost financing that is enabled through federal guarantees that help partners like Mosaic offer even better terms to households to go electric. So you have programs that are familiar and then programs that are new. All of them are improved and expanded from how they have been before. So as a for instance, the investment tax credit for solar has been expanded to 30%. And we'll go through these on the subsequent slides. There is now a tax credit that's available for households to avail themselves of efficient electric equipment. There are tax credits, of course, for EVs and EV chargers. There are rebates for low and moderate income families to access dollars to help them pay for efficient electric equipment in their home. And then there is this significant amount of money from the federal government to help bring down the cost of financing, effectively itself acting as a rebate to families because it's pulling down the cost of the monthly payment. So let's walk through these in a little bit more detail. So the first of these is the tax credit that is in some senses the most familiar in the market, which is the extension of the rooftop solar investment tax credit. Some of you on this call might be less familiar with this or experience it less often on a day-to-day basis, but effectively it has been expanded to 30% as a tax credit and also extended to a 10-year life. Everything in the Inflation Reduction Act is over the 10-year window. But in addition to rooftop solar, battery storage and geothermal have been added as standalone beneficiaries of the investment tax credit as well. There are particularities here. The storage systems have to be, can't be less than 3 kilowatt hours in their sizing. But this tax credit is retroactive to January 1 of 2022 and really is must be accessed by people who have tax liability, which is true of any of the tax credits. So if you go forward, we can also see that there's a 30% tax credit for the appliances that are in the home. So a $2,000 tax credit for heat pump water heaters, another $2,000 tax credit for heat pump, for air source heat pumps. Insulation windows and doors have tax credits. Breaker boxes have tax credits of $600. There are tax credits for home energy audits as well. And so I think actually to call out the breaker boxes and the heat pumps are very important here because these are the kinds of credits that start to tilt the market from fossil fuel machines to efficient electric ones. The credit, as a general matter, cannot exceed $1,200 in a given year unless you are doing a heat pump, in which case it can cover the cost of the heat pump as well. As again, with any tax credit, you have to have tax liability to access it, and it's good for the 10-year window. In addition, if you go to the next slide, there are rebate programs. And so the rebates here are for low and moderate income families up to 150% of the area median income. But as you can see on the screen, the rebates are quite significant. They are designed to be point of sale. They are designed to be stackable, each and among each other, up to a $14,000 cap. If a family is making less than 80% of area median income, the $14,000 can cover 100% of the project costs, including the installation costs. If a family is making over 80% or over area median income, it covers 50% of the project costs. But again, these are also good for 10 years. They do not require a tax liability in order to be accessed. And they can be, in many cases, stacked on top of some of the other incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act, particularly the tax credits. You can go to the next slide. So one way that I like to think about this is that the Inflation Reduction Act, this electric bank account, really meets customers' households where they are. And there is as a result of this, there is really the unlocking of a long-term customer relationship with all of you to help households understand how to access that bank account over time, and in a way that is frankly value maximizing to them. So imagine a household that takes a 30% tax credit for rooftop solar in the first year. They access those dollars and they start to enjoy the savings that come from having their homes powered by the sun. The subsequent year, they decide to do a heat pump and to replace their existing system with a heat pump, and they access the tax credit and local rebates and the rebate programs, and also get themselves an updated breaker box. The following year, they go ahead and use their electric bank account to update their doors and windows, getting a tighter seal and saving more money. And then the year after that, they go back to their electric bank account and get the tax credit, 30% tax credit for the storage. All of those things are eligible and available to them. They don't have to be done all at once. They can, again, that electric bank account can be accessed whenever the time is right for that household. So we go forward. And to put a little bit more sort of color on it, let's imagine an example. And here you have Jessica, a small business owner. She makes $200,000 a year. She cares about climate, but she also really cares about having a comfortable home and doing it in a fiscally responsible way. And so she wants to access her electric bank account. How best to do that? Well, turns out, she's her water heater is about to conk out. It's time to take care of that. She goes ahead and accesses the resources that are available for the heat pump water heater, leveraging the tax credit itself, but then also the energy efficiency rebate program that's available. And she, as a result, can put together across those programs $2,000 to $6,000 worth of value in total savings. The subsequent year, she goes back in and says, okay, it's time for me to get that device that both heats and cools my home. So I'm going to knock out my furnace, knock out my AC, and get an air source heat pump that can do both. And she leverages the tax credit and the energy efficiency rebate, again, $2,000 to $6,000 in savings as a result. And then the subsequent year, she decides, going to make the home a little more comfortable for the family, get rid of some of the draftiness, also upgrade the look and feel of the doors and windows in my home, and do an energy audit to make sure I'm doing the right things along the way. And she can access the tax credit, 25C tax credit for that. The thing to say about all this is that all of those numbers on the page are federal numbers. They are Inflation Reduction Act numbers. That is what's coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act generated electric bank account. But it does not mean that Jessica can't access state, local utility incentives and rebates as well. In fact, the Inflation Reduction Act is actually designed to stack with those other incentives in markets. So it becomes an additional catalyst to make these deals effectively no-brainers for a local family to pursue. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Patrick.
Thanks, Ari. And I wanted to say, express appreciation for you joining us today to be able to share some of this information. We know that Rewiring America has played a really big role, thought leadership that shaped the policies that have been brought to market. And now it's on us, industry, the innovators that have joined this webinar today, to figure out how we commercialize this, right? There's a lot of benefit here to homeowners. They have this electronic bank account to be able to tap into, or electrification bank account. But we need to help them do that. We need to be able to, create purchasable bundles of products and services that allow them then to make these upgrades to their homes and access this. And it's turning some of these decisions, which in the past have been very reactive by a homeowner, a broken system, something that's at the end of its useful life can no longer be repaired and extended, and maybe moving it more into the realm of an intentional choice. And that's a place where certain categories of home improvement have been for a while. For example, the residential solar industry, where Mosaic has a lot of experience and a lot of relationships nationally in the solar contracting industry. No one is replacing their rooftop solar system, right? Everyone is making the decision for the first time to put that, and it's a discretionary choice. And so the industry has built, the solar industry in particular, has built a number of tools and approaches to marketing the benefits to homeowners in a way that has stimulated a lot of demand for residential solar. We think that there are some plays to rip from that playbook, which we think could really help some of the other verticals that are now suddenly getting access to the level of incentives that would actually cause someone to replace potentially a system or an appliance in their home where it might be in the middle of its useful life. Because of the savings opportunity for them, because of the incentives that are available. So it just sort of gives access to these sort of new profile of customer who are excited about the savings, who are excited about the efficiency, who are excited about, once they learn about it, the incentives and the benefits to them in a way where before they just had a problem. They had something that was broken and they wanted it fixed. Clearly, this creates an opportunity to revisit existing customers. Many of those who have joined this call today have been serving customers in your communities for years, right? And you have a cycle. You understand the repair cycle. Maybe you have a service plan on equipment that you've installed. But this is starting to create an opportunity again to maybe expand the scope of what is available to those customers and the services that you can provide, particularly if you are in the electrical practice today, or you have access to subcontractors who are in the electrical practice. This is going to be a sort of gigantic opening of an addressable market that we probably haven't seen in decades in the U.S. in the residential side of the business. Larger scope projects, sort of multi system installations, higher tickets as a result of that, and the opportunity to really expand your own practice in your areas of expertise. So if you're in the electrical trade, but you're not right now looking at EV charger installations or battery installations, those are going to be huge growth categories across residential. And it's going to track pretty closely to the exponential growth that's projected in the EV market, for example. So when people buy EVs, which they're going to be doing more and more every year, they're going to come home and they're going to want an L2 charger. And once they start charging, they're going to realize, I want to have storage. And it kicks off, oh, now I need an upgraded service panel. It's going to create this sort of series of electrification related investments that need to be made in the home. And I think that will be something that the contractors will need to be on the front end of that, because homeowners are not going to know how to solve that problem for themselves. And they will need to be able to avail themselves and access to skilled providers who can, again, not only fulfill on the work, but even in advance of that, distill some of these incentives and some of these choices down to things that are actionable and just sort of packaged decisions for customers of logically bundled products and services that you can then fulfill on their behalf and give them the opportunity to do this. One of the examples that I would offer from the solar industry is the solar loan product construct, which you may or may not be familiar with. Actually takes the ITC, the 30% credit, and bakes it into the amortization schedule of the loan. So what a customer can see at the point of sale is the monthly payment benefit of that ITC, right? A tax credit, 30% sounds great. I have to file my taxes. I know that'll work itself out over time. because I have tax liability, but it's less tangible for that customer at the point of purchase when they're trying to make that decision to go solar versus not. And so the financial product can oftentimes be a way of really highlighting for the customer the direct financial benefit to them of some of these incentives. And so it's just a one for example of how you can see when you make that decision to go solar, the monthly payment benefit and the monthly savings benefit you're getting as a direct windfall of that 30% tax credit. And there is an analog to that for those tax credits as they apply in these other categories, geothermal, for example, and the rebates as it relates to heat pumps. And we'll probably talk in a little bit more detail about what some of those rebates and incentives look like in terms of how we might bring them to market together. Some of that still needs to be figured out. It's very sort of clear, I think, in the legislation and in the policy, what's intended and what's available, how that actually gets, who gets access to it, how do they get access to it, when do they get access to it? A lot of those details, I think, are still being worked out. And it's going to take partnerships with forward-thinking, forward-leaning people in industry like those on this call who've joined this call today that will really shape, I think, what that looks like. And oftentimes we believe it's going to be a partnership between a financing provider who can do those calculations, who can provide and make that benefit very tangible with a product, a financial product to be able to complete that purchase, with the contractor who understands those products and is skilled in the installation and servicing of those products.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Ari. Sorry, I jumped ahead of you, Patrick. If you want to talk a little bit about Mosaics Work.
Yeah, I alluded to this a little bit. You know, we're adjusting our products in real time. We have had products in categories like solar and geothermal that have had ITC benefits in the past, and we're building upon those capabilities. We've introduced new products into other home improvement categories. In particular, right now, longer term products that have re-amortization events in the loan. So 12 months in, let's say, you have maybe a 12-month deferred interest, deferred payment period, and then you have a re-amortization of that loan, which is where it's setting the groundwork for when a customer captures the benefit of those rebates, they can take that money and apply it right to the amount that they financed when they purchased it at the point of sale, bring that down and lower their repayment burden on that over time. And we've extended out some of those terms to 15 and 20 years, because one of the things that we know is that these products will deliver savings over time. The savings are not enormous, but on a monthly basis, but they really add up. And if you can take the loan term, the repayment obligation against this investment, and you can also stretch that out over a longer period of time, you get this really favorable comparison of what is my monthly loan payment versus how much am I saving on my electrical bill, in a way that, again, provides a very tangible subsidy and makes that choice look much more financially attractive to the customer at time zero when they're making that decision. So we're working to integrate these tax credits and rebates in there. We've started by extending out some products that we think are a good baseline template. Long-term products, low interest rate products, products with re-amortization features early in the life of the loan, so the customer can benefit by making prepayments from these rebates and tax incentives and drop that monthly payment over time. These are things that we've learned from our long experience in the solar industry that have worked very well in terms of being able to create added incentive and demand within the solar market for making that investment.
Now I think we're good for some questions, Ari and Patrick. First, folks, continue to add your questions in the chat. One question we've gotten a few times. This is recorded. We're going to send this out after. Please do share with your teams. If you do have follow-up questions, we're happy to help answer them. We'll also be sending an FAQ, which would kind of hit some of the bigger items. But first, kind of want to ask Patrick, because this has come up a little bit, any other lessons learned from the solar installer, solar contractor experience with the solar tax credit that might be helpful for this audience on the home improvement side as they look to see how to optimize this credit?
I think probably the biggest insight and breakthrough that enabled the residential solar industry to grow from really a small kind of cottage industry to the $27 billion industry that it is today was this recognition that you have to take something like a tax credit or a rebate, which is delayed gratification. It's a little bit esoteric, right? It's a benefit to be captured at some point in the future, and you need to pull it into the point of sale. You need to make it part of your proposal. You need to make it part of your pricing and how you think about presenting the pricing and the affordability to the customer. And we think you want to partner with a financing provider who can not only help do that from a sort of financial calculation standpoint, but who can provide the financial product that will capture and really demonstrate to the customer at the point they're making that decision. Because I think what this group has probably found over time is that these industries are not new to rebates and incentives, but oftentimes those rebates and incentives have been very localized or have not been durable enough over time for people to make real investments around how do you productize it, how do you build it into the way that you sell and the way that you fulfill on that. And I think one of the things that's transformational about the Inflation Reduction Act is it extends these benefits on a national basis for a long period of time. So now there's suddenly the opportunity, I think, to make the investment in process and technology to be able to support, pulling those benefits forward and making them very tangible at the point of sale. Because I think if it falls the way of the sort of legacy rebate practices, whether those be OEM rebates, local utility rebates, those are all good, but I think we all know they've seen limited market uptake because it's just too much delayed gratification and not enough presence in the mind of the customer when they're actually making that decision, at the kitchen table.
Speaking of those conversations with the customers are making the decision, I think this is a good question here, but what's the simplest way that you've seen to best approach, because you are talking about tax liability here, and some folks might know well in advance what they generally owe on a year-to-year basis. Other folks may not be as attuned to that. But when they hear about some of these tax incentives in particular, like, how has the solar industry approached that balancing act of there's these really good incentives to encourage use, but it really is dependent on your tax liability? And then maybe from there, Ari, once Patrick gets there, if you can kind of talk a little bit about the rebates and just the income levels there and how that kind of likely will play out.
Yeah, and I would say not only from the solar industry, but even the electric vehicle industry. I recently purchased an electric vehicle, and one of the things that the Volkswagen dealer did is they gave me a proposal, right, that showed this is the cost of the vehicle. Here's what you get back in a tax credit. Here is your net price. And having enough confidence, right, that they're not my tax advisor. They can't assure me of what tax credit I'm going to get, but at least providing the necessary disclosures that it's a credit, not a rebate, and you have to have the tax liability in order to get that benefit. But still, in that sort of point of purchase decision, whether it's in the home, making a home improvement investment decision, or in an auto dealership looking to buy an EV, being able to actually show the customer this is the in dollar terms, not percentages, what you're going to get back in tax credit, what you are eligible to get in a tax credit, and what is available to you in credits or rebates. Because that's what the customer is thinking about. They're thinking about the dollars out the door for them, either upfront or on a monthly basis. And so we've got to turn these incentives into something that really resonates and is working in the same currency at the same time as the customer is making that decision.
And then just to pick up on the rebate side of things, again, the point of sale rebate that is in this package is designed to really help pull down the cost, the front end cost of these machines, to sort of overcome the current delta in price between the efficient electric machines and the fossil fuel incumbent machines that they're replacing. And the theory of the case inside of the Inflation Reduction Act is that if you can pull down the cost of the machines on the front end, then you're going to enable households to benefit from the long-term savings that come with having those machines month over month, year over year, as Patrick was mentioning earlier. And so the point of sale rebate is designed to, again, meet households where they are, to enable them to think not just about the machine itself, but the enabling infrastructure, breaker boxes and wiring, as a for instance, which in many cases are going to be in scope for these kinds of jobs, but also for the labor costs, the installation costs themselves. And so the way that the rebate program is designed sort of at the highest level is just to say that at the for a household that is they're eligible for households making below 150% of area median income, and with a $14,000 cap per household, but with 100% of the project costs covered for households making less than 80% of area median income, and for 50% of the project costs for households making 80% to 150% of area median income. The thing that I would just say quickly, in addition to that, is that these types of rebates and incentives, again, it becomes a different way to have the conversation with a household, and to change the dynamic from being one that is more reactive to being one that is more planful. Because if I have all the rebates in the world, but you tell me I have to wait 3 weeks to take a hot shower, that is not the best sales pitch, probably, for me to share internally with my wife and kids, maybe even the dog. But it is a compelling proposition if along the way, some of that enabling infrastructure is taken care of, the breaker box or the outlets and the wiring that is going to be the setup to electrifying downstream. And so that's where this 10-year window becomes very valuable. And I would just want to say one other thing about this, because I think it's a very important point, which is as more and more of these electric machines are manufactured, as more of them are sold and installed, it's just like the trend in solar. It's just like the trend in EVs. The price point comes down. The more things you make, the cheaper it is to make them. Their unit cost comes down, and therefore the cost to the customer comes down. That will be true over the 10-year window as this market scales. The incentives are not coming down. They are not changing. So year over year, the value of the incentives will just simply increase. They will become more beneficial, there will be more appetite for them, because each dollar will effectively be going further. And so if you sort of think about it as a business, you're putting yourself on a 10-year trajectory where the flywheel will start to spin, and then it will spin a little bit faster, and it will keep going a little bit faster, year over year over year. And so that is an argument for thinking about the sort of that transition path for the economy overall, but for the business that you all are in each and every day, and taking advantage of the durability of the policy. But it's also an argument for having a great partner like Mosaic that's going to be with you through that whole transition period and enable you to scale, because there's going to be so much, our view, so much appetite for these machines over the decade to come, that participating in that is going to be critical.
That's helpful. One of the questions, and maybe Ari, you can talk a little bit about this, it's different variations of how long and what's the period for using the credit. Like, is there a carry forward if someone doesn't use the full $1,200 cap on like doors and windows, for example? If you can talk a little bit about that distinction between the 30% and just some of the dollar figures and the tax credit when it comes to HVAC systems. And then just separate from that, if it just applies to the entire project or some of the individual products, kind of lumping in a few folks' questions, but really kind of, if you can walk us through the workability of that 25C tax credit?
Sure. I mean, I think the one thing to say about 25C is that there is a it's the same of any kind of tax credit. As long as you have the tax appetite, you can access the dollars. So you have a cap inside of a given year, $1,200 generally speaking, or up to $2,000 if you are going to access a heat pump. So imagine accessing a heat pump water heater next year, and that's $2,000. Okay, you hit your cap, assuming you have the taxable income for that. But let's say you did that in December of 2023, and in January of 2024, you decided to do an air source heat pump. Well, that's another $2,000 if you have the taxable income for that year. So, and that could be separated by a matter of weeks. Or a matter of months. It really, or conversely, it could be something where you did got the $2,000 tax credit in 1 year, decided to upgrade your breaker box and took $600 and got the remainder for doors and windows. Or you did some doors and windows in 1 year and then some more in the following year, and then picked up an air source heat pump. So it's the electric bank account with respect to these kinds of credits. Are basically renewed every single year as long as you have the taxable income. And that's why, again, I think it's important to think about the long-term customer conversation and the long-term journey that a homeowner is making, as you all know, as they think about the replacement of their machines, either as they break or as it's cost effective to early retire them. And so, that's one of the real powerful aspects of the Inflation Reduction Act in our view, is that it's sort of predictability, durability, and renewability, so to speak. And so, that I hope that's helpful, Sam, as a first answer.
That is, and if we can touch on the rebates a little bit, kind of as a complement of how homeowners can receive these upfront rebates, how contractors would. And then as a homeowner is looking at it, maybe you can talk a little bit about the Rewiring America calculator as well, and just some of the work your team's done to simplify that homeowner looking at the buffet of options and trying to figure out how they apply it.
Yeah, well, I think that, the theme that you're probably picking up in this whole webinar is that electric bank account, 10 years, there for homeowners, meeting them where they are. Those folks are going to be dependent on all of you to help them, best navigate. And so that's kind of those are some of the headlines. The rebates are going to play themselves out the same way, quite frankly, as the tax credits. Like, again, it's up to that $14,000 cap spread, can spread out over the course of the 10-year window. There's this other rebate program which is more of an energy performance rebate program that has its own elements. And the thing about the rebates, unlike the tax credits, is that rebate program needs to be finally defined, which will happen in the next several months, and then released to the market. And one of the things that we are working on as Rewiring America is to really partner with industry and have that conversation with our government partners about how to design that rebate in a way that is the most efficient, lowest friction sort of tool possible. Because it is designed statutorily to be point of sale. And so those are sort of elements to say. But the reality is, and again, sort of coming back to you all playing that central role with partners like Mosaic, is that, homeowners don't sort of think like Washington language about statutory programs that have different numbers and letters as tied to them, and this form that needs to be filled out or whatever. That's really not how people live their regular lives. And so navigating all of that is critical. So Rewiring America at RewiringAmerica.org, we put together a calculator to help educate folks based on where they live and who they are and what kind of household they're in, what they're going to be eligible for, just at a very high level, and also what some of those machines mean and they look like and how these things are going to work. And I would just think about that as an additional tool that folks on the call can access and use. If it's useful, we'd love feedback from you, frankly, about features and that you would love to see. But I would think about it as a complement to the materials that I know you're going to be getting from Mosaic after this call, but also going forward, as your implementing partner in the field.
And can you remind folks of your website so they can go check it out, and also just to follow you guys and as you're having these conversations on the applicability of implementation of the law?
Yeah, absolutely. RewiringAmerica.org. If you guys want an electric lightning bolt, we can figure that out. It's battery powered. But anyway, so yes, we RewiringAmerica.org is the website, but we're going to be around and engaged in the trying to make these programs work as efficiently and effectively as possible. And, through directly or through Mosaic, would love to hear feedback from folks as we are doing that to help us in doing exactly that for all of us and for all of you.
I do want to make a quick plug for folks on the call to connect with Rewiring America. All the different folks on here, home improvement contractors working with different verticals in this space. The team at Rewiring really has tried to work to connect the dots on the incentives to really build that home electrification journey. And so the learnings you all have in terms of how customers operate today, the learnings they'll have in terms of how these incentives are crafted out, and then long-term to figure out how to continue to make this better. I think that's going to be an important part of the story as we start to see more and more adoption. But on that more and more adoption, received a really good question. Can someone use the tax credit multiple times? Let's say they get a heat pump this year and then a new home 3 years later and want to get another one. Can they use that same incentive again, or is it just once in the life of the 10-year law?
No, they can use it again and again and again and again. And I don't know how many agains I said, but anyway, 10 agains. So as long as they have taxable income.
That's helpful. And maybe in both of you can talk a little bit about, we've talked about combining these tax incentives and rebates just in terms of the home improvement side. How does this work with solar or electric vehicles or some of the other big provisions? If you can just briefly walk through, that different customer journey of maybe it's the solar customer adding on these different pieces, and Patrick, maybe about what's the Mosaic role in that equation, and Ari, maybe that EV customer, and how this kind of works together, just so that we all can start to think through how do we piece this together, since there are a lot of different options here on the menu.
Yeah, I would make a couple of observations, Sam. One is that certainly the homeowners out there across the nation now who have gone solar, have started a journey on electrification and made a big step. They may not have retrofit the rest of their home with electrical appliances. They may not yet have an EV, but they are generating electricity right off of their own rooftop. Those homeowners probably have a much higher propensity to engage in this kind of decision making. Like if you're thinking about in your community, like where would I identify perhaps some of the early adopters, either within my own customer base or just out in the community? I do think that the solar journey is a very sort of strong customer lead source. Do you have partnerships with solar installers in your area? Do you have a way of knowing or getting access to which homeowners in a particular area have gone solar? One of the things that we've observed about customers who have gone solar to date is the vast majority of them get the panels and the inverter that allows them to generate that electricity, use it themselves, and send it to the grid. Very few of them have gotten storage. And so even for those who have already gone solar, there are opportunities to add EV charging, to add storage, to do non-solar related installations that again tie into this broader electrification sort of opportunity and allow them again to access these incentives. The other thing I would observe that maybe is not as visible from outside the solar industry is 90% of all solar projects are financed, either through a lease or a loan, but only about 10% of all solar systems transact on cash or a cash substitute like a credit card. And I think there's two reasons for that. One, it's a big purchase, right? It tends to be $30,000 or $40,000, which pushes you into the range of where a lot of people are going to finance rather than pay cash. The other big driver is these things that we're talking about, these tax credits, these sort of incentives, like they get a lot easier to implement with a finance customer than they do with a cash customer. A cash customer is going to be a bit on their own. You as the provider have no idea what their income is. So you're trying to gauge and make sure that this customer understands they may or may not be eligible, they may not be able to capture that tax credit. You know that if you run a financing, you bring that customer to a financing partner, what is one of the things that they tell the financing partner? What is their household income? Right? We know that, right, as a financing provider. In solar, for example, we apply a minimum income on our decision framework. That's less about making sure the customer has enough money to make that solar payment, which tends to be very small and is substituted from the utility bill anyway. And it's more about making sure that that customer can actually has a reasonable chance of capturing that tax credit. And so there are things that like the financing provider should and can bring to the table for you to help simplify, right? So the financial part of this sale is getting more complicated. It's getting more favorable to the homeowner through these rebates and incentives, but it's also getting more complicated. And we believe that greater access to and greater utilization of financing is one of the paths to simplifying these decisions for the homeowner, because a lot of these benefits can then be calculated into this financing decision and into the financing product. And the financing provider can be a partner in helping the customer understand that. We do a welcome call for every one of our solar customers who comes on board with us early in the process when they first signed a loan with us. One of the things that we talk to them about is the tax credit, how it works, the fact that it is a tax credit, they have to have tax liability. They shouldn't expect that they're going to get a check from the government. That's not how it works. And so just making sure that the customer doesn't have a misunderstanding of how those programs works is something that our solar installers can count on us to help support so that they end up with a happy customer, not a customer who feels like they didn't understand the deal that they signed up for.
And Ari, maybe anything further on your end, just from your vantage point of seeing this space and the tie-ins on different customer journeys into some of these home rebates and tax incentives?
Yeah, I mean, Patrick summarized it, not surprisingly, incredibly well. I think this is about helping customers understand and map their journey and develop, the way I think about it is develop their electrification plan. That is a multi-decision point, multi-time horizon, sort of multi-stage sort of exercise and experience. And some of that is not done in one sit with a customer. But if you can put that customer onto an overall plan over the course of time, a couple of things happen. They sort of are setting themselves up to move from having a home with pipes to having one with plugs. And that's important unto itself. And you, on the other side of that, have like an insight into basically what the trajectory is for that household, which helps you to think about them from your as an ongoing customer and in what way they might be an ongoing customer. And that's really, I think, maybe just amplifying again what Patrick was saying. That is where the transition is happening, I think, the most. Historically, there has been a lot of fragmentation in the industry because you have different verticals that do different things, and then you have, of course, fragmentation by geography as well. There's still going to be folks who specialize and are excellent at what they do day in and day out. But increasingly, households are going to be thinking in a much more connected way. because the EV is a backup system for a heat pump and a cooktop, in the same way that the rooftop solar is an energy provider for all of those things. And conversely, if you don't have a heat pump for your air and your water, you are leaving money on the table when it comes to both the battery in your car and the rooftop solar that you have in your house. And so that sort of more holistic view, in a way, is sort of more complex, but actually, I think in another way is more simplifying, because what you're effectively saying is the move from the status quo to the electric future is the transition that folks all need to be on. And there are a bunch of incentives to help them get there. And the people on this call can help them bridge that experience.
Thank you, Ari. Appreciate that. And one question I can take up really quick. Folks had asked, when does this all start to take effect? As we discussed earlier in the call, 2022, there's not going to be a change in terms of the tax incentives, other than for solar, geothermal, and batteries. You start the 30% credit there. For all of these different home incentives, whether on the tax credit side or on the rebate side, this is into 2023. And so on the Mosaic side, continue to work with our partners, continue to ask us questions, see how we can work together in terms of helping optimize that homeowner experience and take advantage of it. After this call or later today, we'll send out some FAQs. We'll embed some of the questions that folks had asked in the chat that get a little more granular. We'll also just make ourselves available to make sure folks are connected with Rewiring America as we start to see the kickoff of implementation of this new law and take us to that next step. So want to thank Ari for joining today and helping prepare and answer all these different questions, and Patrick for being able to come on and speak to what Mosaic's doing and the work that we can provide for folks. And so, what we can do is we'll stay in touch, continue to ask those questions, let us know what you're thinking in terms of how you're going to bring these products together, and look forward to an exciting next few years. Thank you all.